All right, Brontë, this is kind of one of my favorite topics. Influencers, positive or negative, sometimes come in a second, sometimes they come over a lifetime. And when I speak, I always share about my grandfather with my grandmother, my mom, my aunt. They immigrated from Kiev, Ukraine, to
Hmm.
Canada years ago. And he used to take me for walks in the park when I was about five in Montreal. And one day I finally asked him because he talked to everybody, which is probably where I get the DNA from. And but I said to him, I called him Zeta. How do you know all these people? And he looked at me and he said, "Point." I remember pointing. He said, "See that man over there?" One day I saw him and I smiled at him, and he looked at me and smiled at me, and then came over and they were laughing and they were talking and things. We started doing stuff together, and other people came over to us because they saw us smiling. And
Hmm.
as a 5-year-old, not necessarily, hopefully, a lot of concerns at that time. It's a five, but I remember thinking, well, this is going to be easy. I just have to smile at people and it'd be cool. And then you start getting older and you complicate it too much, and then you come back and saying, well, maybe it is just as simple even as a smile at the right
Hmm.
time to somebody. And I know we have lots of influencers in our lives usually, but can you share two or three people that have been influential in your life?
Absolutely. There's a lot, so forgive me for not naming all of the ones who have had an influence because
I'd
there's
like to
been a
thank my
lot.
mother. I'd like to thank my
Yeah, I'd like to say I
father.
can do an Oscar presentation. No, I think definitely my grandmother, my nana. Um, you know, I grew up, I think, with a mindset of anything is possible and go do what you want to do. And I never really had a gender filter on this, and I have my grandma to thank for that. One of my first memories of her was literally doing a combat roll out from under the hooves of a horse that was rearing up and down because she was trying to give it some worming liquid, and the horse didn't want to have its medicine, understandably. So it was busy trying to stomp her with its hoofs. So she's doing this combat roll under the rails, and the horse is jumping up and down. And she got right back up and went right back in there and said, "Horse, this is what's going to happen." Um, she was tough as nails, and she had a twin sister, and the two of them, I think the only time I saw them wear skirts or dresses was at my wedding. Um, they were just, if they wanted to do it, they went and did it. And as I look back now at the era that they were growing up in that 40s and 50s, to have that mindset then, that was incredibly, you know, impressive to me. And
Oh,
at the same time, she was incredibly generous and warm-hearted and would go out of her way to go help someone or look after someone else's horse or do something. So I always, sort of took that energy, and I was always influenced by that, I think.
I love that. How can we apply that today? Would be nice.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes there's a lot to be said. Like you said, when you're an adult, you make it too complicated. I think these were people that in their own way made it uncomplicated, and that's powerful. Um, the second would be uh, Chris Muscarella. He used to be a professor at Penn State in finance. And, what you said, I think we should never underestimate the power of a comment or a single note or someone just saying, hey, you can do this at the right point in time. Never underestimate your power to lift up people when you don't think. And here I was trying to figure out what I could possibly do in this strange civilian world and navigating army versus civilian and MBA. And I was about to make a decision to not do finance. And he literally pulled me aside at lunch and he said, "You're an idiot. Go do finance. You're good at it. It'll pay better. What else are you going to do?" I said, "Strategic leadership." He goes, "Ah, that's for consultants." He goes, "At least do finance as well." And his classes were horrible. They were renowned how horrible they were. He wouldn't let you use Excel. You had to do pencil and paper. And he said something that stuck with me, which was all Excel does is lets you make bigger mistakes faster. And I think that's a wise lesson when I think about AI, because the question that worries me, and you touched on it before, is how do we know what good is? And I'm not concerned about how AI thinks versus a human. We don't know how humans think, really, at the end of the day. But it's how do you know what good is? And how do we know we're not just making bigger mistakes faster because we've got a more powerful spreadsheet?
Mhm.
So, that's kind of stuck in my head since then. He'd also give us spreadsheets with mistakes in them because he said that's what you're going to get in business, and he'd have hidden rows and mistakes and wrong formula.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciated his learning techniques afterwards. So
Very cool. Very cool. Anyone else you want to mention?
um look, I'd say as corny as it sounds, maybe it's not an influencer, but and you touched on International Women's Day. My dad has always been in my corner and has always been there and been my cheerleader, been my support. Both my parents have. Has always been there and been very accepting. And I think, a lot of the time, particularly in Western culture and capitalism, we focus on the sole hero and the hero figure. I don't think we spend enough time talking about it's an ecosystem. For me to do my job is an ecosystem of support and people around me. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, you're right. When you hear people accepting awards and stuff, whether it's an athlete or an actor or anybody, they know who's doing all the work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes it's sometimes the motivation more than people realize of the people that are receiving the accolades, of all the support that they've had and all the people
Mm.
they're motivated to, at the minimum, recognize them and in all sorts of ways. So, well, I'm excited about influencers, and I think one thing we can learn from what you just said there is we should know that we're all influencing people ourselves,
Hmm.
sometimes even without knowing it, by
Yeah.
that smile or by a comment, etc., and that could make a big impact. So, so thanks for sharing the people that have influenced you.